G'day, it's the coach here, and in this video I'm going to talk through the new set of rules in the Generals Handbook 2020 that you need to know called auxiliary objectives. If you plan to play in Age of Sigmar tournaments or you play in match play battles, you'll need to understand what these rules are about, as well as how to effectively select your auxiliary objectives in order to win and deny your opponent from scoring theirs. There is no perfect combination with these objectives. They're really going to depend on the army you've selected, but not just the army you've selected, the way that you've built your army. It's also going to depend on who you're playing against, as well as what battle plan you've chosen to play today. In this video, I'm going to help you understand the auxiliary objectives framework and give you some ideas and considerations to help you select the best objective for the situation. Again, no two battles is going to be the same. You'll need to start thinking about how you apply them. So without further ado, let's look into auxiliary objectives. So first off, what are they? What is an auxiliary objective? The auxiliary objective is an additional set of rules that are used to determine who wins and loses at tournaments or during match play battles. If you've played in Age of Sigmar for a few years now, or you've come over from a different game like Warhammer 40,000, you might recognize these as secondary objectives. Auxiliary objectives don't replace the win condition for your chosen battle. So if your battle plan is requiring you to control more objectives than your opponent for 5 rounds, you're still going to have to do that to score the major victory. Nothing else is going to change there. In a normal match play battle, you're going to have to choose 2 of the 18 auxiliary objectives to apply to your army for the battle. So these are secondary objectives as opposed to the primary way to win the battle. Now, where they come into play in a normal match play battle is should the game end as a draw. Normally in Generals Handbook 2019 and past editions, often we would use kill points to determine who got the minor victory or the minor loss. In Generals Handbook 2020, according to the book, the way that we determine who is either going to get a minor victory or a minor loss is going to depend on who completes more auxiliary objectives to determine if you got a draw or not a draw. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So that's just on a normal match play battle that you might play with your friends, you might play at a games club, you might play at your local friendly game store. Now, if you are playing in a tournament, a match play tournament, by the way, all of these rules can be found in the General's Handbook either on page 108, which is about auxiliary objectives, or page 116, which is where we talk about match play and tournaments. So when you're attending a tournament, you will be likely asked to choose some auxiliary objectives to complete in addition to the win or losing mechanism in the battle plans that you're playing. So what a tournament organizer might likely do, and again, I say this because each tournament organizer is going to run their event differently. So there's no one standardized rule pack. So you will need to read the rules that are provided by your tournament organizer. But what Games Workshop recommends here, and what will likely be picked up by a good majority of tournaments, is that you will be choosing some auxiliary objectives and they will provide you bonus tournament points. So you might normally get, let's say 5 tournament points for a major victory. If you score a auxiliary objective, they might reward you 1. If you score both, they might give you 2. If they deny your opponent 1, you might get 1. Again, look at the rules pack, look at how people are going to choose how you score a tournament. Now, Games Workshop recommends that tournament attendees will pick 3 objectives per battle. So where it becomes interesting here is that there are 18 auxiliary objectives in the General's Handbook. So what it also tells you is that you can only pick them once. So what it really means is if you're attending a 5-game tournament, it means that you're going to use 15 of the 18. But again, some tournaments may scrap that rule. Some tournaments might ask you only to pick 1 or 2. But this is just the general what you should probably expect. So after reviewing and spending some time trying to digest the different 18 different objectives, I thought I'd give you some general ideas and some advice before we get into the different ones. And again, I'll give you some hints and tips for the different objectives. So First off, there is no best or worst auxiliary objective. There is no golden ticket, silver bullet that you're going to always choose. Each allegiance is going to choose one or many that is based on their strengths and try to avoid some of them as their weaknesses. But unfortunately, some of them are just going to be really hard to avoid. So think about this in your list building. Think about this when you're attending tournaments. Think about things that you might be playing against and how could I possibly score them. You know, you're really going to increase, decrease the likelihood because your battle plan is also going to impact that. So really think about, you know, not every auxiliary objective can be scored in every battle plan. So I'll let that sink in for a minute. Think about your choices. Think about where they can be scored because some can't be scored in different battle plans. The second one is to consider how you might score them as well as deny your opponent. So as I mentioned, especially at a tournament, you may be rewarded a point for scoring, as well as you're going to have to think about if you want the minor victory, and some scenarios it is very hard to get a major victory and you are playing for the minor. You'll need to think about not just how you score yours, but also how do you deny your opponent from scoring theirs. Auxiliary objectives are not the battle plan, and they're not the primary objective, so really try not to lose sight. Think about the win conditions still of the battle plan. Don't fall into a trap of chasing your secondaries, but then losing on your major victory conditions, which might be, you know, burning more of the opponent's objectives than yours, you know, scoring against, or it might be, you know, there's a whole range of different objectives. Just really think about it. Try to find auxiliary objectives that complement the battle plan as well. So, you know, as we go through it, you'll kind of see there's one that's really, really crystal clear, and that was, you know, a very nice complement to Knife to the Heart. But think about where they might complement the mission objectives that you're trying to achieve, or again, knowing the strengths of your army as well as your opponents and your weaknesses as well. You know, really think about and review each of those auxiliary objectives. And when I say review, I'm not talking about on the day. I really think about in your tournament preparation or your event preparation. Really look at the 18 and think about which ones are my go-to, which are the ones that I'm the most strong at. And then there's going to be a batch of them that are just really hard for you to choose. So you might put them towards the end. And then there should be a fat middle where you might have all of these different cards that might vary depending on who you play. So think about the strengths of your army, think about the weaknesses of your army. If you are going to be attending tournaments, really start to practice them and include them into your preparation, because they will be likely involved in your event scoring, and you'll want to know how easy or how hard certain objectives are to achieve. So keep that in mind in your tournament preparation. Don't try to build a list that will try to get all 18 of them, because they're all different, and winning them is going to be really tough in some situations. So don't build a list that is really good at scoring the objectives but still can't win the mission. Again, these are only secondary objectives, not the primary. So keep that in mind. Don't try to build a list that can do all 18. Find the auxiliary objectives that are going to complement your battle plan. So think about, again, the mission you're playing. Keep that in mind and try to find ones that complement them quite well. Things like putting your models in reserve, things that can deep strike, that might come in later in the game, things that you might be able to summon, things where you might be able to teleport. These different tools that are available to you are going to be, you know, invaluable. So if there is an opportunity to bring in some deep striking, some summoning, some reserves, some things that come on the side of the board, some movement shenanigans, keep that in mind, because it'll make some of these objectives easier to achieve. And then finally, I've mentioned it a few times now, each tournament is going to reward auxiliary objectives differently. So keep that in mind and read the player's pack on how your tournament organizer is going to implement these rules. I hope that all makes sense, and I'm sure as we go through the different 18 it'll make more sense, but just keep some of these ideas in your mind. Again, the way Kharadron Overlords is going to handle it versus Legions of Nagash versus Cities of Sigmar versus Blades of Khorne, all these different armies are going to look at all of these different 18 with a different lens and think about their build. So I would love to hear in the comment section how you're thinking about these, and if there's some that are easier or harder for you to achieve. But without further ado, let's look at all 18 of them. I'm going to go over them really quickly so we don't spend 10 years reviewing all different auxiliary objectives. So the first one is the aggressor. What is the aggressor? You complete this auxiliary objective if you control all of the objectives wholly within your opponent's territory. So this doesn't include any objectives located on the borderline of a territory. So anything that sits on the middle of the table, no matter how it's split. So with the aggressor, some hints and tips that I thought about that might help you is it's going to help you, if you're going to have deep striking or teleporting. It's just simple. It's just, knife to the heart is a prime example where, there's only one objective on the territory. So if you can get that particular objective and, teleporting, high movement, super, flying, all of this stuff will help you get to that objective. Obviously, there's going to be more objectives in your opponent's territory. Let's say there's 6 or 8, or 3 or 4 if it's in your opponent's territory. They're going to be a lot harder, so just keep that in mind. Easier if you're going to have a mobile army. If your army is fast, this one is easier to achieve. Probably no surprise. If you are slow, think about how you might be able to do that and maybe where this might be better. Think about where the deployment zones might be shorter. So there's less distance between you. So keep that in mind as you start selecting or building or maybe implementing a unit in your army that is faster than you would normally run. The less objectives in this particular one, it's going to be easier to achieve, and it's going to be harder to claim against defensive armies. If someone has 60, 80 bodies that are going to surround the objective, again I use knife to the heart as an example, or I've got a nice big block of 30 Phoenix Guard, chewing through those Phoenix Guard and claiming that objective is going to be harder than one that is not so, maybe less bodies or maybe less armor save, or keep that in mind. The second one is Assassinate. So the rules of Assassinate is when you reveal this auxiliary objective, your opponent must pick one unit in their army that is a hero. So your opponent chooses, not you. You complete this auxiliary objective if the hero is slain before the end of the battle. So you've got 5 turns, I guess effectively 10 rounds of combat if your army is fast enough to kill that hero. So what do you need to think about here? If your opponent has a high durable hero, Nagash, Archaon is 2 examples that come to mind. There's plenty of them out there. It is going to be harder to slay a Nagash or an Archaon. It's not impossible, but it'll be harder to do. So think about, with your opponent having the choice to choose, think about how you might be able to handle that. Because your opponent may keep that hero in reserve. They might keep it off the board for 4 rounds. They might put it at the back of the board where it's really hard for you to reach, especially if you don't have long-range shooting or long-range magic. Think about the way that you can kill that. In this particular objective, you can slay the hero with melee, with shooting, and magic. So you might be able to chip away with a whole bunch of them, or you might be able to destroy that hero with all shooting or all magic. So when I'm picking this objective, I'm thinking about how can I kill all of my opponent's heroes? Not that I need to kill them all, but my opponent is going to have to choose whether it is a little hero that is hidden behind a big wall of battle line, or it could be that slant at the back of the board, or it could be a hero that's hiding somewhere on the board. Maybe it's a branch wraith hiding in a line of sight blocking wildwoods. Really think about that and think about how I could potentially reach all of them. The next one is the bait. Now, the bait is probably, I did say that, there is no easy or hard or, better or worse. This one certainly is probably the easiest of them all, and you'll see why very quickly. Because when you reveal this auxiliary objective, you must pick one friendly unit in your starting army. So nothing you summon has to start in your starting army. It is basically what's on your list. You complete this auxiliary objective if the unit is destroyed by an enemy unit before the end of battle round 3. So often we're going to have in our armies a screening unit, a unit that's cheap, that might be rushing up to get the objective in turn 1 as fast as possible. You might have a unit of, dire wolves or aether wings, for example, which are super cheap. They haven't got a lot of wounds, and they're really just there to deny your opponent from deep striking your good stuff, or they're to claim objectives early. So, if you don't have something like that, something fast, something, with, and I think Aether Wings have like 6 wounds, dire wolves are, they're all right. They can get into the middle of the board, and they can really be sacrificial. So you want to think about, is there a unit where you can sacrifice essentially a unit to die by battle round 3? If it's a minimum sized unit, so again, 3 Aether Wings, 5 dire wolves, they will be a lot easier to get killed. And it has to be destroyed by battle round 3. So if you're being conservative, if you're slowly walking up the board, there's a strong likelihood that that unit will not die, and really think that the opponent may choose and try to avoid killing that unit to deny you from allowing to gain this objective. The next one is cornered. So you complete this auxiliary objective if you have 2 or more friendly units within 3 inches of the same enemy hero at the end of any turn. Cool. So some things to think about here is you really want to think about a hero on a large base, because getting 2 or more friendly units, not models, units, within 3 inches of the same enemy hero can be tough if that hero is sitting on a 32 mil base or even a 40 mil base. So some things like, a Maw Crusher, Alariel, Stonehorn, Phoenixes, again, Nagash, Archeon. There's so many of these, Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragons, Catacross. All of these heroes have a really large base. So it's going to make your life a lot easier to get 2 or more of your units within 3 inches of that hero. Alternatively, you might want to think about how you might get a support hero that might be going to be in range. Let's say Witch Elves with a Hag Queen behind them, making sure that Hag Queen is, within 3 inches or essentially in combat with said enemy hero. They will need to survive that round of combat, so it happens at the end of the turn. So by drawing that hero in or that unit in, obviously they're going to be in combat, so your opponent can attack. So just keep that in mind. They need to be durable enough to sustain 1 round of combat, especially if you're going for a Maw Crusher. Something like a Maw Crusher or Stonehorn can put out a lot of damage, so make sure that they are durable. And obviously it's going to be easier if you have a higher model count army. So if you do have, two large units, they can sustain a round of combat with that, again, Nagash, Alariel, Stonehorn, whatever the monster or hero is. Monster hero, I mean. It's going to be easier to survive that round of combat. So, more models is going to make your life a lot easier. It gives you more board control and a better chance to be within 3 of that hero. The next one is Defender. You complete this auxiliary objective if there are no enemy units wholly within your territory at the end of the battle round. So you're essentially denying your opponent from being in your side of the board. So how do we handle this? It's not your deployment zone, it's your territory. So you really want to be, if possible, taking first and rushing to the center of the board. You want to be in their deployment zone as quick as possible, whether you're deep striking and pinning them into their side of the board, or whether you're fast enough to rush up the board. You really want to be able to stop them from getting in, because otherwise you're going to lose this one. If your opponent has a much slower force, it's going to be a lot easier to pin them in their side of the board. However, do keep in mind that an opponent might have a flying unit. So that flying unit might be able to jump over, it could retreat, it could move into, your enemy territory, and that would keep, that's going to make your life a bit harder. So really keep in mind and look out for those enemy flying units that might stop you from scoring. Really, think about pinning, think about trying to keep their movement restricted as much as possible. Or you're just going down and trying to destroy them and try to, kill as many of their units as possible, get them to flee. That's a good way of getting them out of your territory. When it comes to domination, you must you complete this auxiliary objective if 3 or more enemy units are destroyed in the same turn. Whew, this is a hard one. And it might be a hard one for most people. Obviously, Iron Jaws, are probably like laughing in Orc because this might be a little bit easier. But where it becomes hard is that you really are trying to coordinate your attack. So you need to be able to destroy 3 units in the same turn. So in order to score this one, you're thinking about attacking small unit sizes. Again, I mentioned the example, whether it was a Phoenix Guard unit, which is a super durable unit. There are a lot of different units. 60 grots, for example, might be really hard to take down. Think about which unit you're setting up, and it may require a coordinated attack. So it might mean over a couple of battle rounds, you're chipping away at heroes. You're doing one mortal wound here, an arcane bolt. You're chipping away at a couple of units and reducing them slowly, not killing them, but just reducing them, so that when you set up for that turn 3, and maybe it's that hero that gets into combat, you've chipped away at so much that you can easily destroy that enemy unit, those 3 of them. But also keep in mind that if you don't completely destroy the unit, they might use Inspiring Presence, or they might not use Inspiring Presence. So, if you're not able to kill a whole unit in this coordinated attack, all it takes is one command point with Inspiring Presence that would stop you from scoring, because they've got 1 model, 2 models that you couldn't just keep, but unfortunately are not running away. So really think about a coordinated attack. Deepkin probably a lot easier, especially if you're setting up for a turn 3 or a turn 2 eel attack. Iron Jaws, often the Iron Suns battalion is going in for a really strong round of combat, so that one might be easier. But keep that in mind and think about how you can set up to score this one. The next one is Grudge. Now, this is a bit of a mouthful. When you reveal this auxiliary objective, you must pick 1 enemy hero in your opponent's starting army and 1 friendly hero in your starting army. You complete this auxiliary objective if that enemy hero is slain by an attack made by melee weapons of that friendly hero. Cool. Alright, this reminds me of old Warhammer Fantasy battles where you could call out a hero that you're in base-to-base contact and set up a challenge. So where this is going to come about, and again, might be easy, might be hard, but what's going to happen is you're setting up a grudge. So you need to be able to kill this hero in melee. Not shooting, not magic, it must happen in melee. So you're basically going for a one-on-one fight. Means you can still chip away and do some wounds through shooting and through magic, but it must be slain by that melee weapon. Think about things like smaller wound heroes are easier to kill, but they're more likely to be protected by a screen. So they're going to be hiding behind big blocks of units potentially, or a durable set of units. So, really think about where you can grudge. Think about how you can get to those grudges. If your hero flies, it might be a bit easier to get to them, but certainly I can hide that hero if that's what you grudge. So keep that in mind. It does sound great, but if my opponent chooses some 5 wound hero, they could just sit them at the back of the board. They could again hide them behind a screen, or they might even bait you. If you set up like a little hero, you might get so blindsided trying to kill that particular hero that actually I'm going to still get the major victory. So again, remember this is a secondary objective, but sounds great, especially if you're combat orientated. With Headhunter, you complete this auxiliary objective if all of the leader units in your opponent's starting army are destroyed by the end of the battle. So a couple of hints here is that, the less heroes that are in your opponent's army, the easier this is going to be to achieve. It's just a no-brainer. If I've got 6 heroes, it's a lot harder than if I have 2 heroes. But in saying that, it depends on the value of those heroes. It could be Nagash and Catacross, which is, probably from memory like 1,500 points, right? So killing 2 superheroes, it sounds easy, but it actually is not. So keep that in mind. Think about how many leader units are in that opponent's army, and how easy are they to kill. Summon heroes are not going to count. So if you're Slanesh and they have 2 Keeper of Secrets and a Lawnmower, and they summon an Epitome or some other type of hero, that summon hero won't count. So it's only the heroes that start in your starting army. And then finally, there are no restrictions on how this unit is killed. These heroes are killed. So you can kill them by combat, by magic, by shooting. You can kill them various ways. It's not like the Grudge, where Grudge is a pure melee one. really think about the way that you're building your army and think that, do I have the range? Do I have the speed? Do I have the threat potential to take out up to 6 heroes or a couple of, quite strong, durable heroes in combat? They might hide in terrain, they might be hiding in the back of the board. They could be surrounded by a large amount of bodies. They might again be sitting on the side of the board for 4 rounds. So think about how you might be able to handle that. And, if you don't think you can, maybe Headhunter's not the right one for you. But if you've got long range, you've got some tools, then this is going to be a lot easier to achieve. With Invader, you complete the auxiliary objective at the end of the battle round if you have more friendly units wholly within your opponent's territory than you have opponents that are wholly within your territory. So you're trying to keep them outside of your territory. Things like deep striking, teleporting, and summoning is going to help. Think about things like, if you've got high mobility, Tempest Eye, for example, is a really fast army that's going to be able to move up into your opponent's territory is a lot easier. Not to say that nobody can't, but you might need to spend a command point for that extra 6-inch run. You might be wanting to, basically move as fast as possible. Think about things like, I did mention deep striking and teleporting, but you really need to stop your opponent from getting into your side of the board. So think about how maybe large units can probably screen and probably kind of, stretch across the board, because any space across the board might mean that they can sneak across, or again, they could teleport. So think about how you try to keep people in their territory, not your own. And it is wholly within as well. So think about, if the battle's happening on the center line, if the unit's not in wholly within your territory or you're not wholly within theirs, it will mean that you will stop them or be stopped from scoring this one. Marked for death. So when you reveal this auxiliary objective to your opponent, your opponent will pick one unit in their starting army that is not a hero. So monsters, battle line, regular artillery, not hero. You complete this auxiliary objective if the unit is destroyed by the end of the battle. So again, we talked non-hero. If you did this against me, there's a good likelihood that I'm going to choose the largest unit, the unit with the highest amount of wounds, the unit with the best armor save, a unit with an additional, damage prevention or some type of, regeneration, skeletons, for example. When they're near grave sites, they're going to constantly come back, or ghosts in Legions of Grief. Think about, you have to really commit to killing that unit. Some armies may choose that particular unit and then sit them again at the back of the board. They might keep them away from combat. They might hold the objective, on the flank. So think about, again, how you can reach out and kill that unit, especially it could be a super durable unit. Don't overcommit to trying to kill that unit because, again, I've kind of mentioned it a few times. These are only secondary objectives, and you may lose sight from trying to score the primary because you're so committed to taking down that big unit or that durable unit that has been marked for death. Think about your opponent in the thick of the battle. You may reach them. They might actually retreat. They might actually try to avoid combat. And if that happened to me, for example, and you were able to kind of pin or get into combat with this particular unit, if they started to die and it's I think I'm going to lose them by the end of the battle, I might retreat them, try to get them out of combat, and then get a different unit and kind of pin you and try to avoid that unit from killing mine. So I'm going to try to deny you as best as possible. So keep that in mind. Mass Panic. You complete this auxiliary objective if 2 or more enemy units fail a battle shock test in the same battle round. This to me is probably maybe the hardest one. And I say this because it's going to be hard to score against high bravery armies. If you've got bravery 10, and you've got a couple of 10 or more models, so you're getting boosts to your bravery. You got a banner that gets a boost to the bravery. Unless you are, I don't know, you like the Luminous Realm Lords that makes you spend 2 command points for the price of 1. I think this one's going to be really hard because there's still a lot of high bravery across the game. Unless you're going to have something like Sinister Terrain, an endless spell that gives you a minus to bravery, unless you've got other things that cause a minus to bravery. I think skeleton banners cause a minus to bravery. Unless you've got a whole bunch of things that either give you a whole bunch of minuses to bravery, or you're able to deny your opponent from scoring command points. You're able to deny them. You're able to make them spend 2 for 1. This one I think could be quite hard. Not impossible, but it could be hard. Maybe it's something that you're really playing for round 4, round 5 in a game. So if you're playing for this one, you're really setting it up towards late. But some armies will be easier than others. The next one is Overwhelm. So you complete the auxiliary objective if the enemy hero is slain by an attack made by a melee weapon by a friendly battle line unit. So it's similar to maybe one, I think it's Grudge, that might be a combat-based hero one, except this time it's the battle line unit that must kill the enemy hero, and it must happen in combat. So I'm not going to choose my handgunners. I'm not choosing my Iron Drakes that, wonderful at shooting. I could teleport them up the board and shoot. Unfortunately, it must happen in melee. I can still chip away at the hero, but the slain must happen in melee. It is going to be easier for armies that have higher amounts of battle line units. So I did mention Lumineth Realm Lords, for example, with the, if you have Wardens and the Sentinels, so basically most of your army is going to be battle line. Cities of Sigmar is another example where a lot of the army is going to be battle line. It's going to be easier to achieve that one if you've got more battle line. And there are some scenarios that will actually reward you with more victory points if you are scoring it or have a battle line unit in range. So a nice little synergy there. Easier if you have low wound enemy heroes. So going up against, let's say a Hallowheart army, for example, and they might only have a bunch of 5 wound heroes, would be easier to score against them than, let's say, let's say 3 more Crushers or 3 Stonehorns with Huskguards on there. So think about the units and think about, how achievable is it that your battle line is able to do it. If your battle line has rend or mortal wounds, it's clearly going to improve the ability to destroy that enemy hero. The more enemy heroes that there are, the greater chance of you scoring. So this is not like Marked for Death where you've got to choose a particular hero. It's just any hero has to be slain by a friendly battle line unit. So think about you might be able to chip them away with some shooters to reduce the wounds, but be mindful not to overcommit because you could kill them outright with shooting. Think about your units. Think about what has the most amount of damage potential as a battle line unit. I think about my Grots, for example. My Grots are, I can put a whole bunch of mortal wounds out there. Or, again, going back to old school Stormcast, you might have some Soul Maces. Think about where, or, your Phoenix Guard have a Rend -1, or think about, any potentially damage output where is going to be best to kill a hero. And obviously the last one, as mentioned in a previous auxiliary objective, is that the larger the hero's base, the more attacks you're going to be able to gain and obviously try to chip down. So, again, I think about my netters as well. Not only can they put out mortal wounds, the -1 to hit makes them more durable. Maybe I should go back to my Grots. The next one is Pillage. So Pillage, you pick one terrain piece that is wholly within your opponent's territory. You must complete this auxiliary objective if you have a unit that is a combined wound characteristic of 5 or more within 3 inches of that terrain feature at the end of any battle round. So you can score it in any battle round. Sweet. It's not the end of battle, it's not by turn 3, it's just any battle round. This objective cannot be completed by a unit that was set up on the battlefield in the same battle round. So I'll put that into context. I've got a unit of Shadow Warriors. Shadow Warriors can come on in the board, or I can use my the Sylvaneth unit, the Tree Revs. Tree Revs are able to basically teleport onto the board. Now, when they teleport, they're treated as a setup, not as a move. So, can I score with my Tree Revs or my Shadow Warriors, for example? I still can, but the way I do it on the table is a little bit different. So what I mean by that is I might put my setup unit in turn 3, and then score it in turn 4. So I can't do it immediately, but I could be setting it up for a future round. So things like teleporting, summoning, deep striking, you've really got to get them onto that terrain feature by turn 4 in order to claim it by turn 5. Single models can claim it so long it has a wound characteristic. So it could be 5 models, 3 models, so long as you have 5 or more wound characteristics within 3 inches of the terrain feature. And if you don't have teleporting or movement shenanigans or deep striking, anything with a higher mobility in your units is going to make it easier. Fly, good speed, you can run and charge. All those things are beneficial in order to get onto that terrain feature. Next up is Prey on the Weak. You complete this auxiliary objective if all of your battle line units in your opponent's starting army is destroyed by the end of the battle round. So as we mentioned, summoned units that come for free don't count. They must be on the starting army list. Some things to keep in mind here is to keep a lookout for minimal battle line choices in the army. So if an army is just taken, 3 cheap units just to fulfill their battle line requirements, and they put all of their points in their battalion, their elites, their heroes, their monsters, this would be a great choice because you've only got to take out these minimum sized battle line units. So keep that in mind. When you're trying to handle these types of battle line units, think about the size of the unit, the armor save, the amount of wounds in each of the battle line units. So if you were to play my Gloomspite kits, for example, I've got at least 140 wounds in this battle line choice. So I've got 4 units, 140 wounds in those units. Really hard to chew. So this might be a better solution for a more elite-based, or maybe a deepkin army that's just taken 3 units of 10 thralls, or a couple of cheap direwolves or skeletons, or there's a lot of cheap battle line, tree revs, spite revs, Sylvaneth's gone all Kernoths, and you've got those three units of 5 spite revs. Think about that. Finally, ensure that your battle line is you don't want to waste too many resources here. So make sure that the battle line is easy to achieve. I mentioned the grots, for example. Chewing through 140 grots with a net can be quite difficult. Or it could be your chain rasps with a legion of grief. When they're being regenerated, they could be very hard to chew through. So keep that in mind when you choose this one. Prized possession. When you reveal this auxiliary objective, you must choose one friendly hero with an artifact of power in your starting army. So this is either going to be an artifact from the realm or an artifact from your battle tome. You complete this auxiliary objective if that hero has not been slain by the end of battle. So it's going to reward you if you have a durable hero with the artifact of power. It is going to be easier to achieve if your opponent doesn't have long range threats, and you can hide your hero. I think, for example, again, if I've got a combat monster, let's say a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon or a Frost Lord on a Thunder Tusk, they're going into combat. They're trying to do some damage, and while they might have an artifact of power that might boost their attacking prowess, there's a good chance they're going to be slain by the end of the game. So some of those heroes that can hide, some of those heroes that might be sitting within a battle line selection, they're hiding away, being screened, or they're sitting at the back of the board kind of interacting with your opponent, they are going to be easier to score this one. Or if your opponent chooses this, there's going to be harder to get that. So keep that in mind. When you think about your artifacts as well, think about where obviously the best hero for this one. So if an opponent doesn't have any battalions, it means they only have one artifact of power. So obviously the more artifacts of power, the more battalions that are going to be in your opponent's army, the easier this one is going to be to score. We're seeing some Stormcast lists at the moment that are 3 battalions in a list, which is crazy, right? But that means that there is going to be 3 to 4 opportunities to get an artifact of power. The next one is Seize Ground. So you can reveal this auxiliary objective. You must choose one terrain feature that is not within your territory. So it has to be either in your opponent's territory. If you complete this objective, you have one or more friendly units within 3 inches of that terrain feature after the end of the 4th battle round. So a couple of things here is it's easy to score if you have teleporting, reserves, deep striking. So this one's going to be by the end of turn 4. Larger terrain features, you're looking out for that. So obviously the larger the terrain feature, the easier that is to get a whole bunch of units within 3 inches of it. It's going to be easy to score with high mobility, and it's going to be easier to score if you have flying as well. So again, it's no different to the other terrain feature. There's a few nuances there, but again, high mobility, some deep striking, some flying. That one's going to help. And again, look out for those larger pieces. Territorial. So when you reveal this auxiliary objective, you must be within 1 inch of the terrain. So pick one objective on the battlefield. You must complete this auxiliary objective at the end of 2 consecutive battle rounds. Okay. So basically, you want to be able to go. You want to be holding this basically battle rounds, not turns. So in a sense, can this survive 4 rounds of combat? Because that's ultimately what 2 consecutive battle rounds is going to be. It's going to be easier with an objective that is in your deployment zone. I mentioned Knife to the Heart, for example. That's 1. Literally, the battle condition is, you want to claim that 1 versus defend that 1. Putting more resources and kind of controlling that objective is going to be easier there. And, you want to be able to use your screens to kind of keep your opponent away from that objective as possible. So an area where this one might be really hard is if anything it has like 6 or 8, any of your objectives. So think about one where you think it's going to be easier for you to hold. So you've got to choose that one objective. It's not any one, it's just you get to choose that one. The last one that we've got, 18 already. So this one is Vengeful Counter. So you complete this auxiliary objective at the end of if any enemy units are destroyed in the same turn as a friendly unit is destroyed. So basically, you're coordinating attack where both you need to be able to kill a unit and they are meant to kill you. It's going to reward you from having, minimum unit sizes or low wound heroes that they might easily die. It might reward you from not using Inspiring Presence and having a unit destroyed at the end of the battle round. It may reward you from chipping away at units again with shooting and magic. So, you're really trying to set up and any of these armies, I think about an Iron Jaws, Iron Sun, for example, which is like this ultra, it's a really strong particular build that's going to get into your face in turn 1. They might crush you and they might destroy a whole bunch of your units, but unless they are able to lose something in return, and an example is one of my friends runs, a Maw Crusher with a whole bunch of piggies. To kill a whole bunch of piggies when that's hit you in 1 round of combat could actually be a tough task. So you need to be able to lose as much as gain here. So it's a bit of a trade-off, this one. This is an interesting one. So some armies are going to have a really easy time with this. Some are going to be really hard. Or you might need to change your play style in order to score this one. But again, this is a secondary objective, not a primary objective. So keep that in mind. All of these aren't going to win you a tournament, although at a tournament, you may get more points for it. So think about the objectives, think about your army, think about how your army is impacted, think about things like, think about your build, think about how many of these can you score, should you change your list and try to optimize your particular build. That might happen if you are going to a tournament and the tournament organizer does reward you for a tournament point or a couple of tournament points for not only the major victory or the minor victory, but also scoring your additional objectives. Think about as well if you are playing this and you're not allowed to double up. And I imagine a lot of tournaments will say once you've picked a objective, so let's say I pick Grudge in game 1, it means during game 2, game 3, game 4, game 5, I'm no longer able to play Grudge. So as I progress through the tournament, the options to me are going to get harder and harder. So claim the ones early on that you can claim. Think about should I find myself, and especially if you're going to be winning and at the end of day one, you're 3-0, you're going into some really tough matchups, and you probably know the meta at the time. Right now it could be Seraphon, Zench, Cities of Sigmar. It could be like Stormcast, with a shooting army that's kind of coming up at the moment. If I'm going into the heavy metas, can I still use the rest of my auxiliary objectives, or do I need to hold something that I could handle a Deepkin or a whatever army? Obviously, if you're reviewing this in 6 months' time, the meta may change, but keep that in mind as well. So, as much as you want to save the good ones for later, you also don't want to not claim tournament points when they're available. So, I think this mechanic becomes interesting. It becomes you have really good opportunities to split the battlefield. So if you're a tournament organizer and you're thinking about don't I introduce tournament points for auxiliary objectives, unless you've got a different scoring mechanism, you've got your alternative secondary objectives, you've got something different, this is definitely worthwhile introducing. So I would love your thoughts. There's a lot of things that we've covered here. Each army is probably listening to this video with a different lens. The way I look at those objectives for my cities, even with my Hallowheart versus my Tempestide versus my, let's say my Greywater or my Hammerhall, is going to be different within the cities alone. Then when I look at it with my Gits, when I look at it with my Sylvaneth, when I look at it with my Zench, when I look at it with, all of my builds, when Gargans eventually come out, each of these are going to look very different. And some of them are going to have strengths, some of them are not going to have weaknesses. So I'd love your thoughts. I'd love you to let me know what you're thinking. How are you thinking about using it? Have you found you've used them already and some are easy, or some sound hard, but they're actually easier to achieve? They're ones that better suit your army. Hopefully, I've given you plenty of ideas that you will be able to incorporate at your next tournament, at your next event, or at least when you're playing with your friends. Make a better selection with the auxiliary objectives that you choose. G'day, I hope you enjoyed that video and you're left with some new ideas. One of the biggest ways you can contribute to AOS Coach is by liking the video you just watched and leaving a comment in the comment section. This lets YouTube know this is a good video and it should recommend it to other hobbyists. If you'd also like to support the channel even further like these bloody legends, go check out AOS Coach on Patreon. Otherwise, don't forget your triumph.